And that makes this Circles and Squares, but with a fun twist. This is our first ever official episode of Circles and Squares Extra. So, double welcome to the show. For those of you who haven't caught up with us in the past or are new to this, we've kind of started a brand new spin-off. Extra is just going to be somewhere where we can talk about things outside of video games, such as movies, shows, books, other games, and or just some spoiler things that we, wouldn't normally put out on the regular episodes. So, this is exciting. Thanks for being here with us. James, welcome.
Thanks for having me too. I'm here. I was just letting you do your thing. This is a big deal. It's the first time you're hosting one of our episodes of anything, and it's the first time for Circles and Squares Extra. It's our first time making our own content about something that's not video games. So a lot of firsts here on the show, and you know what? It's only our second time doing a show on webcam as well. So it's all exciting stuff, and looking forward to chatting some Marvel with you today.
Yeah, it's almost like we've got our own what if version here, where in this alternate reality, things are a little different at Circles and Squares. Ooh.
We got a blue background and everything too. Oh my God, for those video listeners.
Right? What does the color symbolize? Many things, but that's for you to figure out. We won't tell you. But anyway, so today we're going to be talking about What If. The show finished, I think, about 2 weeks ago, and we watched every episode fervently, and we got a lot of thoughts on the show. It was different and interesting and strange. So I think first we'll kind of go over in a spoiler-free section, just an overview of what we thought, overall opinions, the quality of the show, the concept, the art, the storytelling, and then after that we'll get into a spoiler breakdown of going through each episode individually, and finally in the end culminating in what we think our favorite episode was, and what it showcased about the strength of the show, and on the flip side, which is always the most fun, our least favorite episode and kind of where we thought it faltered a little bit, and then finally what we hope for season 2, because it has been renewed. We're going to see more What If in the future, so it's always fun to speculate on weird wacky things like that. But before we get started, we'll just do a tiny little bit of housekeeping. So this is our new weird schedule. It's Friday today for when Extra will come out, but our regular scheduled episodes are still on Monday. So this upcoming Monday on the 25th is going to be the first standalone news show. And then, of course...
Exciting stuff, Kate. Exciting stuff.
Very exciting. There's been a lot of news, actually, so that'll be exciting. And then the alternating Mondays, like what came out earlier this week, will be a regular game episode. The last one was really good. We had some Metroid Dread, which was super exciting, and we talked about Destiny and all sorts of good things, so you can check that out or look forward to more of that in the future. But I think for now we should get started, because we got to ride this excitement. Absolutely. And so, let's let you get started. What were your overall opinion? What do you think of What If?
What do I think of What If? Well, it was a good show, I think, overall. It was a nice change of pace. I really liked it. It was a palate cleanser. That's kind of how I view it. I think that's more or less the terminology that I've been using for my opinion of it. We just went through 3 pretty high quality MCU TV shows where we've got movies coming up. It was nice to kind of get into something animated, something a bit of a side project. And that's what it was really for me. It was a side project. It allowed Marvel to get into some types of genres that couldn't really happen in the MCU, or at least not without making some really weird, aesthetic twist. Like they couldn't have zombies in the MCU, for example. They also got some more out of characters that maybe we'll talk about this more when we get into certain episodes, but they got some more screen time out of characters that are more a couple of fan favorites, I would say, that don't really get a lot of time to shine in the bigger movies. So I really like that. I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about the cutscene. See, this is us talking about games all the time. The animation and some of the way that the visuals and the effects they had going on were pretty cool. So I'm sure we'll break those down. But overall, yeah, I think it had some ups and downs. Not every episode was as strong as necessarily as strong as the one before or after. But it was fun to watch. It was fun to go along for the ride with you, and we're both speculating, different things about the show. So it's fun in that sense. But I would say it definitely for me comes in at the bottom of my MCU TV show rankings, and probably the MCU in general. I would say it's in the lower part, but I still think it's fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we had a similar overall opinion. I think the highs were pretty high. There were definitely a few standout episodes for me. And I think as well, too, like, you gotta have the right expectations for this show. I know some people looked at it really seriously and were like, oh, look at these plot holes and, how exactly do the Infinity Stones work here, and kind of tracing back through the timeline. And I think, that's definitely not an invalid criticism because, with the skill of those writers, like, those are definitely things to take into consideration. But I think what I came to the show looking for was just the exploration of some interesting ideas that we would never get to see in the MCU, and just some kind of fun, like, twists on, what if this happened, and what about these, like, wacky, crazy, like, more out there concepts. And I think for some of the things, they really did show us some interesting new stuff, and some of the episodes I think didn't quite land. And I think, part of it was a pacing thing. I know they had some troubles with COVID and getting the whole season together, so it was a little tumultuous.
Yeah, like the whole one episode didn't even get to release as we came to see.
Which is a shame,
so, yeah,
because that
was
one
a
looked
big
like
downfall.
it really could have been one of the more exciting ones. But I think overall, like you said, I enjoyed it. It was, at the very least, it was fun and a good palate cleanser, and it was just exciting to not know what you're going to get every week. And I want to say too, I think the animation ended up being pretty standout to me on certain episodes. I think we both agreed that in stills, it's not the most exciting animation, and some of the faces were a little bit, they weren't super expressive, and the mouths were a little awkward at times. But I think in motion, the animation was really nice. Like, a lot of the fight scenes, especially when there was magic involved, and some of the more ink-drawn scenes were really gorgeous, and it looked so nice in various sequences.
Yeah, there was a few for sure, and like I said, well, I'm sure we'll get into it when we get into the spoiler territory. But there was a couple fight scenes, and two in particular, I know that we really noticed in that we're like, wow, this is definitely, like, you can notice the budget must have just gone like through the roof.
Yeah.
For those couple of scenes, just they were so incredible, and not to say that the rest didn't look great. And like you said, I mean, I think we agreed that it looked a lot better in action than it does in stills. I think that there is, not to say that there aren't some beautiful shots. Like, I've worked on the thumbnail for this episode and like there's a really cool shot of Captain Carter, like it's a good picture. But overall, I think you're right. Yeah, some of the faces they're a little strange, and I don't know if it's really because the animation, like, is it the art style, or is it because we just know what these characters look like so intimately, so when they look a little bit put into that cyberspace type of world, like Bitmoji-esque or something, like it's just a bit weird to say, like, well, there's Benedict Cumberbatch, but not really, but it still sounds like him because he's the voice actor. But it's just a little bit strange in comparison to the MCU. It's like the same kind of thing we were talking about on the regular podcast about how we like that the Guardians of the Galaxy game. With that one, the character designs they took in a totally different direction, and they, Rocket had the beaded beard, and all the characters really looked a lot different than their MCU counterpart. Whereas in this, I think, because it is more connected with the MCU obviously than the game, but the characters look as near as possible to the MCU actors, and so because it's like this weird uncanny valley kind of thing. I don't know if that impacted what we thought of it overall, like, 'cause I think it's well made, but it's just a bit weird.
Yeah, I think so too. I was thinking, it would have been cool, and they obviously didn't do it, and maybe, spoilers, there's some reasons near the end why they didn't. But I kind of expected it to almost be one of those, like, Love, Death, and Robots kind of show, or I think the new Star Wars one where each episode is a different animation style, and I think that could have been, like, really cool to maybe, like, fit it to what was going on. But I think you're right, like, because it's all technically in the MCU and just, like, spin-off offshoots, like, it wants to be cohesive, and it has to be those same characters that we know, and they did it. Like, I'm amazed they got so many of the voice actors back, and the ones that they didn't get, they got some very convincing people, because we kind of looked up a few after each episode, and we're like, oh, like, who did the voice of that? And there were some that were like, I would never have known that it wasn't the actual voice actor, because, like, they had some very convincing doubles.
I agree. I was going to say, especially to point out, I don't know who it was, and I should have probably looked this up before we started recording, but whoever played Black Widow that wasn't Scarlett Johansson, I think, did an absolutely killer job.
Yes.
She was honestly, like, very convincing. I almost wouldn't have known. I don't think I would have known, to be honest.
No. Her, and the other one that stands out, and he just had a small role, but I just, like, happened to see something on Reddit about it the other day, and it was the guy who played I think his name's Obadiah Stane. Is that his name from Iron Man?
Oh yeah,
The
yeah,
guy that's like, he
yeah,
built his suit with some scrap, and
yeah.
they got some guy who like did his like arrogance perfectly, and it was
That's
it was
pretty
kind of
good.
funny.
Yeah, I mean, there's been so long since we've seen his
Yeah,
character. I guess it's
that's
not as
true.
noticeable maybe as a main, but yeah, that's pretty good. He did a good job.
He did. Okay, well, I think now we're sort of stepping into that territory of maybe want to get into a little bit more detail. So I think here is your official spoiler warning. We're no longer going to gloss over some of the more gritty details.
Where do you think spoiler territory cuts off, Kate? Like, is it a 2 week thing? Is it I always draw this distinction of like, when is it okay to tweet about this stuff? Is it 2 weeks? We'll go with it. I think for a TV show, 2 weeks.
I personally would give longer, just because like, as I'm not always up to date on things. I've got a busy lifestyle, I work, I'm a full-time student, I got a lot going on, I just have a new cat, like, my life is crazy, and I gotta have time to play Arkham Horror. You don't understand how many hours in a week I need to play Arkham Horror. So there's a lot in my life. I don't have time to always be up to date. So 2 weeks is like, I think like 2 months more so is what I would want. But
Okay.
we'll give you the leeway. This is official spoiler warning. You've had 2 weeks. You've had an extra 2 minutes of us hemming and hawing about this. It's go time.
Exactly. That was the point.
Exactly.
You can be, let's do it.
So we're going to start with the first episode, episode 1. What if Captain Carter were the first Avenger? And I've just made a little fun note beside all these episodes, and I'm going to call out because the spoilers are off now. We know that these are not just standalone episodes, and that they're culminating to something bigger. So this was effectively Peggy's episode. And what did you think of it?
I liked it. I think it was a fun way to kick off the show. I don't know. I feel like we might have a bit of difference of opinion on some of these episodes, Kate, coming up from just, I know we've had conversations offline about a lot of this. And I know from our conversations that we were both really liking Captain Carter. I think you maybe more so a little bit more than me. But I don't know. I feel like as I thought about the series a bit more, this one might have slid down a couple of places in my overall rankings of the show. I think if for nothing else other than, well, I really like Peggy. And I think that, it's an interesting twist to see her become the super soldier, especially when you then put Steve in like the Iron Man type of role. I think that was really cool. But I just feel like this one was very similar to like the what if scenario didn't change a whole lot of like the actual outcome. Like Peggy and Steve, it's interesting to see them kind of take different roles, but she's very similar to Steve at the end of the day, even though they're a bit different. And it wasn't just as drastic maybe, and so it's brought it down to a couple pegs for me as we've seen like as we went on with the series. But I think it was some cool action. I liked seeing Stark again. Stark's dad, of course. I forget his name now for some reason, but Howard, yeah, that's right. Howard, that was cool. And yeah, I mean, overall a good episode, but I would say it was pretty safe ish. And yeah, what about you?
Yeah, so what's funny is I think I totally agree with everything you say, but I think my overall opinion is a bit different. So the first thing I wrote thinking back about this episode and refreshing on it was safe but solid. And so I think this was actually
yes.
But I think this is actually a really good episode to have started on, because it kind of gradually puts you into the frame of like what if could be. And so I really like all the very big drastic changes in how all the trickle down effects and what is so different about some of the other episodes. But I also think that like I enjoy just something a little bit smaller in scope and a little bit more intimate. And like you said, I really like Peggy. I watched Agent Carter not too long ago. I think actually like just before Loki. So I watched it like recently, like with the other TV shows.
Yeah.
And I think it actually holds up really well, like on par quality with the other shows that have come out recently. And so I think Peggy's great. I think her taking the serum is like, she's like hella strong already. And so for her to get the Cap serum,
yeah, she's like, got some skills with that shield already.
She is an absolute machine. And so I think the action was really good. There were some really cool like storyboard parts in this where she like went through the plane in one scene. She fought her way through the plane and then jumped on the Hydra Stomper and flew off in like one really nice solid take. And I think they played it really well. So while I agree that like it didn't have huge implications in her being Captain Carter instead of Captain America, like it doesn't really change much in the MCU overall. They kind of fulfill that same role. I think it's still like a really cool like what if concept, and it's interesting to see their relationship inversed, and like, you know, I really like their romance. Like she's still into Steve because it was him as a person, it wasn't him now that he's like, you know, like a superhero.
And that was a great little inclusion, especially like the way that they kind of ended it off with that little reference to him as well.
Yeah, and I think it's just super, super charming and fun episode. And of course, all the references to the movie are cute. Like, as nice as it is to see Deviation, it's kind of fun to just relive the movie again in a slightly different way. And so, like, you know, all the fun references about Bucky, like, joking or saying, like, I could have lost an arm, and, like, all those things. Like, it's just fun and silly. And the last point I want to say is I think it's also really smart to have Zola come up here in an earlier episode, because he kind of ends up out of nowhere being important later in What If. And like, he's definitely one of those characters that's been so long since he's been very relevant in the MCU that like you could have easily like forgotten about and like overlooked. So while I think this is a really like I said, safe and easy draw into the show, I think it's actually like did set up some smart building blocks for what isn't going to be important later.
Totally, yeah. And I don't know about you, but I've not gone back and rewatched any of these episodes. Like these are all my impressions from just watching them the first time. So I mean, I feel like there would be a lot of stuff that we've either forgotten or would have been like some kind of Easter egg reference to like, hey, this is going to connect at the end, because that was the through line we were having the whole way, is like we were going back and forth. Will this connect at the end and will it not? And I think that maybe they hinted towards that. I'm not sure. But definitely like I'm sure they must have somewhere, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, what's funny, we actually had a conversation on that. I think it might have been later on, episode 3 or 4. And we had a talk, and I was like, this is all coming back at the end. Like, it's all culminating. All these people are going to be in the final showdown. And you're like, there's no way. And we'll move on to the episode. I was convinced.
I was skeptical if it was going to link up, you know, like there wasn't a whole lot tying them all together. And there were some clues for sure. And I know that you were kind of piecing those together. And I was like, oh, you know, there's no way, it's an anthology. And then, yeah, you were right. You win. It's one point for you.
You know what it was? And it wasn't even like I was super smart on any specific Marvel details. It was genuinely just how in each episode the Watcher got a little bit less distant. And if you notice, he's so far back silhouette in the background of the first episode. And the next episode, he's still very far like silhouette. But each episode, he gets that tiny little bit closer. And in episode 4, Strange notices him a little bit. And then after that, he's like very, very like forefront. And that to me was just like such like subtle like inclusion of him becoming more and more like prevalent and like grounded in the world, that it had to mean something.
You know, I think it just was like, from my perspective, that was just like, oh, they just did this way, like he noticed Strange because Strange is so powerful, and that was kind of like for that episode. But yeah, I mean, look who was right, it was you. But
that's what I get for overanalyzing media as a literature student. Finally, it's coming into some use. Okay, so we'll move on. Episode 2, I think, which is a fan favorite, is What If T'Challa Became Star-Lord? And this is obviously T'Challa's episode. So this one was really exciting. I think this is kind of the opposite of Captain Carter in the sense of like, it's very intimate and safe. This was a really big scale. So much changed when T'Challa is the one that gets picked up instead of Peter, and he becomes Star-Lord. And like the galaxy is just, they're like doing so well. Like Yondu's a different character because he's changed. Like Thanos is part of the team. Like Drax
Thanos was the funniest part. I loved seeing that.
So funny. And like And they're just like making fun of him for his genocide plans. He's like, it's not genocide, guys.
It's like he was so easily talked out of it at the end of the day too. Like what must they have said to him to change his mind? Like it just I guess his whole life must have been completely different.
T'Challa's a very smooth talker. He's got maxed out charisma. But it's kind of silly and it's definitely a joke, but at the same time, like Thanos isn't just evil, right? Like he doesn't want to destroy things because he's a bad dude. He wants to destroy things because he genuinely believes that this is what's best for the universe. And so I can see that if he has another alternative option that he thinks is equally as beneficial for the universe, then he would go for that. So it was silly and funny and like totally played off as a good joke, but then like legitimately Thanos might do that.
I mean, for sure, it's interesting that they would explore that, and I think that shows like the depth of a character like Thanos, that they could you could make, like you just made a good argument as to why, you know, he could get turned like that and actually be a good character in the MCU. So it's interesting to explore. I just want to say before we get any further into this episode too, my biggest thing was just like it was so amazing to see Chadwick Boseman again. I guess, I mean, animated obviously, but he was actually a pretty prominent character in a lot of this series. I don't know how many episodes he was in, but it must have been at least like two or three episodes, right? That had him in it. So it was great to see him play that character again. I think they actually dedicated the episode to him.
They did
as well, right? Like the credits. So it's just great to see him back in that role. But yeah, the whole switch of him and then Peter Quill at the end too, dancing in the Dairy Queen, like is it when he didn't get picked up and become Star-Lord, just killed me at the end. I think that's probably my biggest takeaway. Those are my two biggest takeaways along with Thanos from this whole episode. And like just going over it before this, like I feel like at the time I remember really liking this episode, but it's one of the ones that I feel like I remember the least.
Okay, I guess it's been so long since we've seen it. Being like the second episode, but yeah, I did a little bit of refresh on this one because I was also very fond, but like had trouble like totally remembering everything that happened. But so I went through and just did a little like refresh, just some highlights of it, and it is great. It starts out with a similar like the heist at the beginning, but like obviously T'Challa's not dancing and doing Peter Quinn's dumb thing, and then it like goes that one, I think he's like a Ravager. He joins them at one point, but like he starts Star-Lord's like, don't you know who I am? I'm Star-Lord, and like in the movie he has no idea who the hell Peter is, but in this one he's like T'Challa's biggest fan and he's so excited. So like that's super cute. Drax has a cameo as a bartender because because like his planet wasn't destroyed, right? From Thanos, so now he's just like bartending and it's awesome.
Got to make money for his wife.
Yeah, exactly. He has his family. Like, it's great. I think this episode is probably where the humor really hit for me. I think the whole show overall really like leaned into the MCU humor and interjected a lot of it into most of these episodes. And I think in some episodes it landed really well for me, and in other episodes I didn't care for it too much. But I think this is one of the episodes that it was really funny. Like, yeah, Peter dancing at the end of the Dairy Queen was hilarious, and like all of Thanos' stuff. And then even just like in the kind of climax scene where they're fighting the Collector, who's sort of the big bad of this one. Without Thanos, he had his Infinity Stone and he was able to kind of thrive, and he's just got all sorts of like random MCU weapons. Like he's got Cap's shield and like Hela's helmet from Ragnarok, and like it probably doesn't make sense as to why he has all these things, but like it's just cool to see them all, so I'm totally okay with it. And they do like that funny like sticky fingers move. Him and like Yondu and T'Challa do like sticky fingers to get the glove back, and it's just sort of like it's really not taking itself too seriously in overall tone, but then at the same time it's very like heartfelt and emotional with T'Challa and like him connecting with his family at the end. And so I think it sort of balanced that kind of serious, not serious very, very well. And I think it was probably one of the stronger episodes for me.
Interesting. I really, if I could go back and rewatch one, then I think it would be this one, because I mean, I'm remembering all this now as you say it, and I remember, like this was a fun episode, and I think you really hit a good point about the humor. Is like, I think that a lot of this show, like, it seemed like they forced the humor notch like just that one little bit too high on a lot of it. Like they just tried to push it. Not that the MCU is always like comedic genius, but you know, I'm sure we'll talk about the Thor episode later, and just like it was too much. And I remember like some of the gags in this, especially with like Thanos being good, and it's just like they don't try and hide it, they don't try and set it up, he's just there. And then like the Drax thing, same thing. Peter at the end is like unexpected. I think they do pace the humor out pretty well, and I think Yondu even too. It had some funny stuff happen with him as well when you see him, and like to the point of the Collector too, and like how he has seemingly weapons out of nowhere that would make no sense, and you know, different items. Like, you know, that's the point of this thing. You can't, if you're gonna sit here and criticize, and I know you're not, but like people that would sit and criticize and be like, well, he would never have had that. You know, he couldn't have got this. Like, man, this is Marvel's What If. Like, let them have some fun with it. You know,
If
just
you're gonna
throw in some
criticize,
Easter eggs for us.
if you're gonna criticize anything about the Collector, you can criticize how ridiculously ripped he was. That guy was the most jacked guy we've seen in the whole MCU, bar none. Like, he was huge.
He was like Master Roshi from Dragon Ball Z. He just shows up and he's like this little old guy, and all of a sudden he's like jacked out of his mind.
He was. That's so funny. Okay, so yeah, they got off to a pretty strong start. And then we moved on to episode 3. What if the world lost its mightiest heroes? And this one was interesting because in doing our count for where we end up at the finale, this I don't think actually pulls anyone. This is just totally its own episode thing.
I think you're right. I mean, yeah, I mean, Black Widow was in it. Was she in the final?
She
final bit.
But that Widow comes from episode 8.
Yes.
So this one,
you're
I
right.
think.
Okay,
well,
yeah. Then I think.
Yeah, well, it does have some characters again because you know they're existing in these multiple universes. I don't think that anyone actually gets pulled from this one. So this one actually is just I guess you could say, a proper standalone episode.
Yes, so yeah. I think this episode actually was one that, remember I said Captain Carter had went down a bit in my viewpoint since I watched it. I think this one's actually one of the ones that really went up.
Okay.
And I really think this was interesting. Like the ending of it aside, I don't know if I really loved the way that they just kind of pulled Hank Pym out of nowhere and said he was, you know, it just seemed like there wasn't really a lot of clues leading up to it. Like it was a hard mystery for the viewer to solve.
Yeah.
But I loved the style of this episode, like a Marvel murder mystery type of thing. So like, I don't think they really have done anything too much like this in the MCU. So it's a great example of, I think, what we were both looking for in terms of like, let's see some different stuff out of Marvel. It was cool that they just killed off like Tony Stark so early on. You know, you'd never think he's in any kind of peril in the MCU, at least until like, you know, you get down to those last few movies. So it's interesting to have seen him like, you know, get killed off. And it was just kind of nice to see Nick Fury get to be in something as well. He's always one of my more favorite characters. So nice to see him get some action. But interesting. I mean, it got a little crazy at the end though. Like I said, like Loki kind of comes out of nowhere, and they use his powers to defeat Hank Pym and all that stuff. Like it just kind of goes off the rails a little bit, but at least the first half of this one I think was really interesting. And it's one of the ones I would also love to have seen. I would have loved to see this one expanded into something bigger, like really go into that murder mystery and show some more like how they piece this together type of thing. Because I think it's a really cool concept.
I agree. I think this episode actually has potential to be my favorite episode, but I think it would have had to have been an hour long instead of the just half-hour episode, because I totally agree. I'm a sucker for murder mysteries, especially when they're done well. And I love that it was structured in the days of the week, because I didn't realize before this episode that all of those events actually took place in this time span of a week, where Fury was getting all those Avengers and the scene where he meets Iron Man and the Hulk is happening and there's a lot of crazy shit going on. That was a bad week for America. He's a busy guy. And I think it's so cool. I even like that it's using the Pym tech and that's how they're killing them. It's such a cool twist. And it's once you realize what's happening, it's yeah, that's the only way that someone could have done it, right? And it's the injection, well, he's so small, he fits in the needle, and that's so cool. But totally agree that the problem I have with it and what let me down a little bit is that there isn't really a lot, at least for a viewer who maybe there were small comic book details that someone like a super fan would notice. But for someone who's just kind of been following the MCU and that's sort of the width of their knowledge, there wasn't anything that hinted towards Hank at all. Like, we didn't get any references to him or Ant-Man or to like Hope being the original Avenger. So like, I was trying to figure it out the whole time, and then it felt not satisfying because it felt like I wasn't given the chance. And so the best thing about a murder mystery is either the oh my god moment when you figure it out yourself, or that moment of recollection when you do learn what's happening. You go, oh my god, it all makes sense, it clicks. And so for this, it's like, oh, well, that's totally possible. I see how it was him. But there's no like moments to click back and make it all feel really satisfying. So it just was kind of an underwhelming conclusion, I thought.
Well, you would have had to pretty much just take a guess that like, oh, I guess if you use pin particles, this is doable. But that would be a guess based on like logicking the MCU and what you know about it rather than what the episode has shown you, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
You're totally right.
It wasn't like broken or wrong in any way. It just didn't have any kind of emotional connection to what it ended up being.
Yeah. And when you said too, like this is, or I think actually we both mentioned it, that this is one that we'd rather have extended to an hour. I mean, it made me think like this could be extended into, I said this, I think during when we were watching it, but I think it would be cool if they had taken like this group of Avengers that kind of comes out of this, and like, what if they just made a TV show about them and it was like a spin-off of a spin-off or something, right? Like, it's a bit weird and they probably won't, but I thought it was cool at the end, like Fury began to assemble more heroes, and I think he found like Steve Rogers or something right at the end, and like pressed that Carol Danvers, her little summoning pager thing, and you know, it would be cool to see. I'm just a sucker for teams, like squads, you know, and like, who else is he gonna summon? Like, what's the team gonna look like after he's done? Like, I just wish we could even see something like that. Just like a take on something like that. Maybe that's like a season 2 wish, but I mean, yeah.
Who knows? That could be a season 2 what if. But yeah, I think overall this is probably it could have been a top tier episode. It's a middle of the pack for me. I think the humor worked in this one again for me. I think Coulson stands out as being really funny in this episode. Like, he kept talking about how like hot he thought Thor was, and like, because they were doing
I like to see him back.
Yeah, and we haven't seen Coulson in so long, and he's a great character. But yeah, there's the scene where like Thor's hammer is there, and he's like talking to Fury. He's like, "There's someone here, and he's gorgeous." And like later on, he's like, "He smells so good." Like, I don't know, something about like the way he delivered the lines like just really worked for me. And like, there was a couple really good details, and I can't take credit for noticing this myself, but I saw it on Reddit recently, and like, they were just talking about like good details from this episode and how like so much is pulled from the film, like a lot of the speeches, and like Iron Man like being in the donut when they go find him is like exactly from the movie. And someone pointed out that Thor's eyebrows are animated like really blonde, and it was like back in the first Thor movie they like bleached his eyebrows for some reason, and it looked really weird. God. And they like got rid of it obviously because it was just like a weird detail, but they actually like had Thor have the really light eyebrows. And like, that's
amazing. I love that.
Yeah,
those little kind of details. I thought that the whole series in general did a really good job of tying in little MCU touchstones of like, okay, so this is around the time that, you know, Thor had his bleached eyebrows, and then you can kind of place it like what else was happening in the MCU at that time, so it has that context. And they did that in every episode. So the donut was another one I remember, like that little what was that, Iron Man 2 or 3?
Iron Man 2, yeah,
exactly,
he's
which
in the donut.
Yeah, when he had the party. Okay.
So I mean, like, I'm sure you could do a whole like show on just one episode running through all the little Easter eggs, I'm sure. And despite all the shortcomings of the show and, you know, some of our gripes, like, you can tell this was an absolute passion project, and whoever, you know, was involved in making these episodes really overall did like a stellar job. And I think that will maybe lead us into the 4th episode, which I think has potential to be both of our favorites, if not everybody's favorite, because it is just the absolute powerhouse. in terms of
It was. It's for
animation.
sure mine. Yeah,
Yes,
for sure
animation,
mine.
storytelling, everything about this episode just totally landed for me. And this is, of course, episode 4, What If Doctor Strange Lost His Heart Instead of His Hands? And from this episode, we pull the infamous Dark Strange. Ooh.
Spooky. Yeah, the Halloween episode. Hey, well, I guess maybe one of 2 Halloween episodes actually.
Yeah.
I mean, where do you want to start, Kate? This was a great episode. I think we need to start actually near the end. When we mentioned earlier that the animation budget in this show seemed to really spike up at a few moments during the series, and this was the first one of those that we saw when Strange at the end is absorbing all of those demons and like all those different things, and you know, it kind of his powers climax and all those that like one shot of him like with all those different things kind of popping out. Oh my god, it was amazing. It looked so cool. And like, could you imagine if this whole show was animated just like
Oh,
that? How amazing it
I
would
can't
be.
I can't
um
imagine how much that would cost, but oh my god, it would be a treat. Like, it was a visual spectacle. Like, you watch it and it's a totally different experience watching it like live as the show, and then going like kind of in stills that people have cut out from the episode, because there's so many shots where like it's Strange, but yeah, overlaid on top of him is demons and like horns coming out and tentacles and all these different eyes, and he's like turns into like a bug, and like he's got spider legs, and he's got like a lantern face, and he's Dormammu at one point, and it's just like it's an unending like montage of all these like amalgamated creatures within him, and it was just like an absolute visual treat to watch.
Yeah, it was cool. I remember just sitting on the couch watching that one, like, oh god, so cool. But the premise here is cool too. I mean, I think it really shows an interesting side of Strange's character, of like how determined he is to really become like so masterful at whatever it is, whether it's his job as a surgeon or like, you know, a sorcerer supreme or whatever his title is. But just the fact that, and also like how dedicated he is to it. Obviously he, you know, is in love with Christine and being so desperate to save her, and the whole setup of this episode is just so tragic, how he's not able to save her, and then it goes down some really twisted it's almost like a Full Metal Alchemist concept, you know, like you got to bring her back, but at
Yes,
what
it
cost,
is.
type of deal. But I mean, I think the whole arc just really made sense, and in fact I think this Doctor Strange arc that they showed, obviously it's based in the comics, and Dark Strange or whatever he's called is a real thing. But I mean, this is to me even more interesting than his regular arc of becoming like the regular Doctor Strange. So I would love to. I mean, we say this about a few of them now, but I would love to see this one expanded too, and just, I mean, more about this character specifically, because it was fascinating to see how he kind of descended down into that desperate, and like he'll do anything at all costs to get her back, and then what a mistake he ended up making in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the way they ended the episode as well, because it's so potent. Like, he just has to sit in that cage for eternity, just with the knowledge of not only that he can't save her and that he's failed, but the amount of destruction and devastation he caused in the process. And there's no closure for him. It's just on him, and that's it. And I think it's really cool that they brought him back in the end, and these characters, you know, they're moving forward into second season and whatnot. And I don't think this necessarily like makes the episode worse, but I think that would have been a very powerful ending to just have him totally have to sit with. And so on one hand, I'm excited to see more of him, because I think he's a really neat character, and I agree, I think this arc for him was more interesting than his MCU arc. But at the same time, like, I think that it was such a powerful ending, and to kind of have it sort of retconned a little bit is maybe, I don't know if that diminishes it or not, or how fair it is to say that, but
Well, I was gonna bring that up when we get to the 9th episode. That was one of my talking points about that. So I was gonna leave it there. But I mean, I guess it's another thing too. Like, do we expect to see this guy in the next season? Like, there's no guarantee these characters will be back. That's just, I mean, it would be cool, but you never know. But I mean, yeah. But I mean, I don't really have too much else to say about this other than the one thing you touched on earlier, which is the first time we really see the Watcher interact with any of the characters in any meaningful way, like other than narrating us and kind of setting us up as the viewers as to what's happening. But clearly in this one they have a little interaction, and then yeah, we really got that kind of, I wonder if these are going to connect, or like, what is the watcher going to do? Because before this point, this is where I was just thinking, like, this guy's just straight up the
Mm-hmm.
narrator. Like, he's just
Yeah.
like the guy from Tales from the Crypt Keeper, you know, he's telling me the story,
This happened to a
and I'm
friend of a
listening. And
friend of a
so,
friend of mine.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome.
He had a red and gold suit.
Yes, he did. That's super funny. Yeah, but yeah, I think anyway, that's kind of we hit the nail on the head for this episode. It's the standout one. I've got two other points. I want to say I love Bug Cape. I love that he took a cape from a bug. Like, he was eating all sorts of like weird ass, like crazy demons, and then he got to one little bug and he's like, nah, I'm not gonna fuck with this one. He's like, but I will steal your cape. So we even got a dark cape to go with it. And we talked a lot about the ending of the episode, which I think is, it's definitely a highlight. But I want to say the montage they did at the beginning as well, I just want to touch on that briefly, is also, I think, really well done, because they went longer with it than I think they needed to. They know they're strapped for time with these episodes, right? Like, they're telling a lot of big, complicated stories in a small time frame. But I think it was really powerful that they showed the montage of Christine's reoccurring death over and over, in so many different and horrible ways, no matter what Strange did. And I think they really let that simmer, and it really sunk in, like, how futile and desperate it was for him, that no matter what he did. And I think it really sold how dark he was willing to go. So I think just everything about this episode, I really don't think I have any complaints. It's tragic, it's human, it's emotional, it's showing us something very different, but still feeling natural for the character. And I want next season, whatever they do, I want them to take note of this episode. And the other thing too is they didn't try to make this episode too funny. This episode was very serious in comparison, and I think that added to the strength of it, because it didn't undermine the emotion of the episode and how messed up it was. And spoiler for the next episode we'll talk about, I think that is something that they really need to be careful with.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a good segue actually into the zombies episode.
Yeah.
And it's, yeah, that's another one to me that's really went up my list again. And it's interesting you bring up the humor in this one, because to me, like, I totally agree with you, Doctor Strange. It was great that it wasn't funny at all. We said before that it seems like they tried to really force a lot of jokes into these episodes. So, like, obviously the Strange one, really great that it wasn't. I kind of appreciated some of the humor in the What If Zombies episode myself. Like, it was nice to take a different tone rather than just having two really, really dark episodes back to back. And like at the start when Peter has that little video that he makes, and it's almost like a Borderlands type vibe to the video and all the characters and whatnot. But that really hit for me, and I really liked that. And like Happy jokes around about he's got like some kind of goofy t-shirt on at some point. I thought that was pretty funny. Yeah.
And he does the blam blams.
I mean, yeah, right. Yeah, it was good. Like, I think that this episode is like an encapsulation of what I feel the humor was in the series, because like those things were really funny, but then as it went on, I feel like it could have started off funny and then went to that kind of darker tone where like Vision feeding people to zombie Wanda is like one of my favorite concepts in this whole series. Like, I think that's so dark and twisted, and another example of how like love can twist a character, even like Vision, who's so reasonable usually and so like just is interesting. But then I think they almost overstepped as far as like too much humor. When do we really need Scott Lang to come and start cracking a bunch of jokes with his head in a jar also? It just kind of felt a bit weird. But I mean, the zombies were a very cool concept, and I again credit for doing something strange. But I mean, I like this episode. It's moved up my list. It's probably in the list of episodes that are like, I enjoyed it, but I know it probably isn't technically the strongest, and there's a lot of plot holes. But I thought it was pretty cool.
That's interesting. Yeah. So this is episode 5. What if zombies? And you brought up Wanda and Vision, and that was definitely my favorite part of the episode. And I made a little note here, in keeping with my tally of who comes from what episode, And this one I put Wanda because technically she does cameo very, very briefly.
She does.
So
Yeah, she's in
Wanda
it.
comes from this episode, kind of, zombie Wanda. But yeah, that was by far my favorite part. I think it's really tragic, but it's also really gorgeous. And seeing them kind of have an inverse of the situation of in WandaVision, where in that one, Wanda's so driven by love and grief that she sort of traps Vision. And here he's kind of doing the opposite to her. So I guess they're both equally crazy and then they like deserve each other. But
you can really tell the English literature analysis coming out on this one.
But it's so nice. And he says at one point, because he's feeding her, and like you said, he's supposed to be like logic and reason, and he's such an analytical mind. But he says at one point, he's like, I know I shouldn't be doing this, but it's the only thing that like makes sense to me. Or he has some kind of line where he says about how like it's the only logical thing for him to do. And it's kind of like, oh, that's because he loves her so much. Like it's the only thing that logically he can do because of how strong his emotions are. And it's so sweet and it's so wonderful, but also absolutely terrifying because zombie Wanda is the scariest thing in the world. And he's like not just feeding her regular people, he's feeding her like superheroes and Avengers.
He has like someone chained up in a closet or something, doesn't he? Like Black Widow or something?
T'Challa,
yeah.
And he's like feeding him like regular humans aren't good enough. Like you need these superhumans. It's horrible. And you know when she comes out in that first scene and she's like lit in the corridor with like in red and the shadows, and she looks like a genuine like horror monster.
Yeah.
So I think that's awesome. I think a lot of what they did with the zombies I really liked in this episode, but it fell flat on me for the survivors. So Wanda and Vision are awesome. The scene where they have like
Wanda's hardly a survivor.
That's what I mean. I love the zombies. I'm not as keen on the survivors. So yeah, they're awesome. Like Zombie Cap is fantastic when they have to fight him. Like Bucky fights him and he like Zombie Cap shows up and he like throws the shield back, and then as Zombie Cap is being decapitated, they like play like a really like dark version of his theme song, and I remember that standing out as like a shiver, is like ooh, like the corrupt Captain America theme song. It was really cool.
Yeah. I think that was actually one of my favorite scenes in like the entirety of this series, was probably that moment of like fighting the zombie Cap and all like that exact moment. Just it was emotional almost, you know, to hear that.
And the fact that it was Bucky that had to take him down. He's like he says like I'm sorry at the end to him. Like he's like tough. He does what he has to do. He doesn't hesitate. But like God, that guy's gone through enough. Like, please give him a break. Like, please be nice to Bucky in the future. He needs something.
What more does he need to do?
Right? Oh, him and Elena got to start dating. He needs something good in his life. It's my MCU hot take. But yeah, I think that while I really enjoyed that part and the idea of zombie superheroes that still kind of have their powers is like so incredibly cool. I think this one, the execution didn't quite hit perfectly for me. I found the humor it was too much for me, and I know a lot of people are kind of hit and miss on MCU humor, and typically I tend to like it more than I dislike it. Like some of the movies I find really funny, and some of the episodes earlier we mentioned were really funny, but this one I just thought was a little too much. Ant-Man especially, I totally agree. I don't think his inclusion was really necessary. Which is funny because normally I find him to be a really funny character. I love Scott Lang. But
he wasn't written the same almost, you know. It seemed like he was in the MCU, he has a function and he's kind of like, you like him because it's Paul Rudd. Like he's just so likable. Sort of but like in this, I don't know if it's like Paul Rudd's screen presence is kind of missing or something, or the fact that he's almost like a Family Guy sort of talking jarhead character.
Yeah,
like it's just
he's
I don't know.
They Futurama'd him and like not in a good way.
Yeah, so, Futurama, that's the one, sorry.
Yeah. So I agree. I think this one to me is the winner of the award for greatest idea, not so great execution.
And I'm with you too. I mean I just think that out of remembering these now as a series, this one still sticks out in my head for some reason, so I still raise it up that little bit, even though it missed a lot of stuff at the same time, but it was
Yeah.
just so interesting. And like Thanos at the end, especially too, we want to shout
Yes.
him out. Zombie Thanos
Yeah.
with the gauntlet that's like nearly done. Like that would have been, or again, would be so cool if we could see what's gonna happen.
I agree. I think this one wins for like, please maybe expand on it. Give it a second pass by. But that kind of leads us into sort of this mid-lull period where I think both of us thought that these few kind of middle episodes, we kind of got a little bit colder on the show. And this brings us into episode 6, which is What If Killmonger Rescued Tony Stark? And this, of course, is the Killmonger episode. So I know both of us were kind of cold when we watched it. Did your opinion change, or how do you feel about this one?
I mean, this is probably the hardest episode for me to talk about in terms of like what I thought. Well, maybe not hardest, that's the wrong word. People really love Killmonger. They think people love him, and he was when I said earlier, you get more out of characters that people really love that don't really have a whole ton of time in the MCU, at least to this point. I know Killmonger is going to be back, but to me, it's like I'm really glad people got more of him. And that kind of that double agent, backstab kind of guy who's also puts on like a really positive face outwardly, and people seem to really like him even though he's not really trustworthy. Like it's a very cool storyline how he's sort of manipulating Tony and then also manipulating the army and gathering all these forces in Wakanda. Like it's a cool story, but it just kind of seems like his whole plan sort of climaxes and then it just ends at the end. Like what is his ultimate goal? What is his mission? What's he trying to do? When Shuri and Pepper get together at the end, then they're suspicious of Killmonger. Like that's interesting. Now that they've established what Killmonger's doing, I would love to see again how Pepper would combat this and what they would do, especially since Tony's gone and there's all these other problems. But and like he's basically infiltrated Wakanda, by the end of the episode too. And how will this all resolve? Like it just seems like it's the prologue to a very interesting story that then is just over. And so yeah, I mean, to me, as someone that's not really a huge Killmonger fan, like I have nothing against the character. I think he's cool, but he's just nowhere near the top of my rankings. It was just a bit. I guess the subject matter just didn't interest me as much as others, and maybe that's why it's a bit lower for me.
Yeah, I kind of feel like this one was a wasted opportunity, or it just kind of felt like some pacing issues. And I agree, like at the end, like Killmonger's in there, he's got his Gundam army, and he's ready to fight Wakanda, and things are going well for him. But I feel like this episode spent way too much time on setup and not really on strong character moments or action or anything else. And it kind of almost in a weird way felt more like Tony Stark episode than a Killmonger episode. And I think it would have been better to have framed it the other way around, because he's the character that goes forward from this. He's the character that, people really want to see more of. As great of a character as Tony is, we've seen so much Tony. And so it's more exciting to get a little bit more Killmonger. And we kind of see him and we know sort of what his overall goal is because of the MCU and what we know about his background. But he doesn't really get a chance to ever discuss what his plan is, his motivations. He doesn't really shine in an emotional way. He doesn't really get like a big character beat, aside from he's doing a lot of things and his plan is moving forward and in motion. But I didn't really feel like we got a lot of personal time with him, if that makes sense.
Well, I don't think you do, because I mean, one of the things, correct me if I'm wrong, like again, this is just my memory and reading a quick synopsis, but I think one of the things is he doesn't really get to ever talk to anyone in the episode that he's not trying to take advantage of. So he doesn't have an opportunity to tell the audience or discuss his plan or give us any kind of exposition of to what his final goal is, because we're always seeing him as like manipulating a character we like more, which is kind of weird.
Exactly. And so it kind of framed him almost as more of like a manipulative and like bad guy, which I think is kind of the opposite of why Killmonger's such an interesting character, is because he's not a bad guy. He's not a selfish guy. He's not in it for like the power. He's like a Thanos type. I mean, he's not obviously as extreme as Thanos, but he's in that same kind of villain.
He's like an anti-hero of sorts.
Yeah, exactly. Almost. Like a villain you can identify with, because his motivations are really pure, and he wants to help people, but he's just got a method that is in contradiction with who the hero of the story is. And so that's where the conflict comes from. But in a different framing, he could very well be the hero of a story. And in this episode, I really felt like he was never painted in a heroic light. He was always kind of using underhanded tactics, which we don't really associate with heroic figures. And so knowing who Killmonger is as a character made this, I guess, is like what was interesting about it. And I don't think this is the kind of show where you should come into it without being familiar with the MCU. So I don't want to like criticize it too much in that way, but I think it would have been beneficial to get some like a character moment with him that just made him seem a little bit more sympathetic as opposed to very much an antagonist, which we have the knowledge that he's not, but at the same time, like, you know, like you make someone look like a jerk for half an hour, they're gonna feel like a jerk regardless of what you know about them. So
yeah, definitely. They could have done it better, and I think you hit a good point of like, yeah, no one should really be watching. I mean, I shouldn't say you shouldn't be watching it, but don't expect to really understand what's going on if you have no relationship to the MCU at all. Like these episodes are so predicated on knowing so much about these characters already, so that they don't have to set up who everyone is. So that's exactly true.
But yeah, again, I think this one was just sort of like I just felt kind of disappointed by it. Not so much in what actually happened, but just in where I think the potential was, and you know what we got on screen. It felt like there was a lot of maybe cutscenes or some pacing issues, or it needed to be a 2-part because, like you said, it totally ends on this cliffhanger. Like you're just out of the setup, and something's about, like, you feel like you just got out of the prologue and you're about to start the story, and it's over.
Exactly. And it's not like, I mean, so many, I think most of these, if not all of them, are cliffhanger endings, but I feel like they're cliffhangers in the sense that, like, okay, we finished kind of that arc, and now something new is going to happen. Like when Thanos shows up at the end of the zombie episode, whereas this is just kind of like, it doesn't feel like the arc is yet complete of Killmonger's plan, basically. But you said something about being disappointed, and I mean, you want to talk about disappointment?
All right, that's my cue to lead us on to episode 7. What if Thor were an only child? And this, of course, is Party Thor's episode. Wow, there's not too much to say about this episode. James, for anyone who's not looking at the video, James is just kind of face palming a little bit.
Face palmed, you know. This one, I mean, I don't know where to start, other than if you really like MCU humor, and you don't mind it being really cranked up to the point where it's like nearly every scene is supposed to be a joke. If Thor is not your ultimate favorite character, then I don't think this one's for you, honestly. And I was originally kind of defensive of this episode when I saw, I mean, a lot of people online were flacking this one, right? You know, like, but I would say kind of rightfully so for some of the responses. Obviously, never be mean to the people that make the show. Like, it's still a quality episode and, you know, well made, but it was a bit cringy to watch. Like, I felt a bit of secondhand embarrassment.
I'm so sorry. I accidentally opened something by mistake and it went in front of our cameras. So,
oh no.
I'm so sorry. You were saying like something really good, but I really fucked up. So
that's okay. We're leaving it in, Kate. We're leaving it in. We're doing it live. It's only our second one.
That's all right. All right, keep going. I'm sorry, guys. That's my menu bar on my computer. I'm using a really nice PC over here. I hope nothing too personal was on there.
I'll check.
Oh, dear. All right, keep it rolling.
That was my point. What about you? What do you have to say about this mess of a slight mess of an episode?
It's about as messy as I just was. You know, I will say that I got 2 positives for this before I say that it sucked. And the first positive is I really like Loki in this. I think he's fun. He's like a proper frost giant because the premise is that he doesn't get adopted by Odin. So he stays with his frost giant parents and grows up there. But him and Thor are like really close still. They're like best friends because they still like kind of grow up together and have a relationship, but they don't have this like sibling rivalry. And so they're actually on like really good terms. And so
it's ironic how the relationship is like so perfect now.
It really is. And they even still refer to each other as like brothers. And I think they make one of those dumb like brother from another mother jokes, and it's like not great.
Oh, I'm sure they must. Yeah,
But
I'm
they
sure they
go.
must.
I mean, that's where this episode goes. It goes that low. But I thought their dynamic was good, and Loki's always great. I think he showed up at, like, in the Hank episode. We didn't talk too much about him. He was awesome in that one as well. I think everywhere he goes, he's just an absolute star right now. So I like that. I actually like Party Thor. In not necessarily in this episode, but I like Party Thor as a character, and I like that we have him going forward for episode 9 for the finale. I like that iteration of Thor because Thor is, like, in Greek myth, he's such a hedonistic character. He's basically like the embodiment of hedonism, right? Like, he just drinks, he goes to war whenever he wants, he just has no consideration, he just, like, whatever he wants to do, he indulges in it 100%. And so, like, him coming into, like, a frat boy party is, like, a really funny take on that. And I like him as a supplementary character. I think the problem with this episode is that it wasn't funny enough to justify being its whole episode. And so I like that we have this character to make, like, cameos in future episodes and to play off of other characters because I think he can be funny. I just don't think that all of the jokes landed and that it was, like, entertaining enough to sit through an entire exclusive episode about frat boy, like, party jokes.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to sum it up. I mean, I would get into, like, why was Carol Danvers, like, not able to beat Thor kind of at the end? She's always been so invincible in the MCU. Why did she struggle? You know, it was kind of weird.
I don't know.
Kind of weird, and, like, the way that his mom came, it was just just a very strange episode. I mean, we don't need to get any more into this one. It's too bad that I mean, I'm sure some people really loved it. Wasn't for us.
Yeah, I think it's basically, like, it's just humor. If you find it funny, it's great. If you didn't find it funny, well, at least you had next week to look forward to, because episode 8, as we kind of alluded to earlier, is the Natasha episode. And this is What If Ultron won? And I think for me, this is the other really standout episode. And I think this is another episode where they really blew the budget. Because, oh my god, some of that beautiful animation's coming back. When Ultron finishes this, like, first of all, there's kind of two stories happening simultaneously in this one. There's Natasha and Clint, and they're trying to stop Ultron, and that's happening. But at the same time, you have the Watcher who gets discovered by Ultron, and he gets absolutely, like, surprised. He really, like, seems like the stakes get raised amazingly. Like, he really seems like he's so above it all, he's so disconnected. And then Ultron breaks through his, like, crystal glass palace that he's behind.
That was such a cool moment.
And it's, like, it's shocking. They don't, like build up to it it's very abrupt, and it is such a cool moment. And so I think both of those plots, like the Watchers thing and Natasha and Clint's thing, like, really worked for me. So this episode hit on a lot of levels, and it's just gorgeous. Like, when Ultron and the Watcher are fighting and he's, like, eating planets and, like, they're punching each other into different dimensions, like, it is so cool. And it is, like, the highest scale I think we've seen from, like, almost anything in the MCU, really.
I mean, aside from Sokovia, like, floating in the air, I guess that would maybe count. But I mean, you're totally right. There's some Dragon Ball Z scale fights going on. Like, I mean, he, like, moves a bunch of stuff out of the way in a big field, and they fight, and they're flying into mountains and stuff. Like, it's pretty crazy. I really like the way you brought up the duality, like, the two plot lines on this episode. I thought it was really strong. I'm always someone that's wanted more of, I guess, like, Natasha and Clint together in the MCU, and just some more scenes building up. I love their relationship. I love that the MCU is been able to show, like, this relationship between, you know, a male and a female character that has no romance whatsoever, and I think that's so powerful to include something like that. And I again, like, I love the parallel where this time Clint is the one who sacrifices himself at the end to be able to help, you know, Natasha escape and get away from all those Ultron drones.
And when you mentioned stills earlier, I think this is one of them where he's falling down, like, the silo or whatever it is, and he's falling, and he kind of turns and shoots, and they have this moment where it sort of zooms back and, like, blows the scale out of all the drones underneath, and him falling with the arrow, and it's just this like beautiful, like the light framing him, and it was just like they kind of linger on it for a second, and it's like you're feeling the emotion, and it's just a gorgeous moment. And exactly, I think that's wonderful. They do the inverse of where he sacrifices to save her, because in this universe it's her that's got more to live for and more motivation, whereas in the opposite it was Clint. He had the family and he had something to go home to, where she had the Avengers and that was it. And so in this one, like, she's the one that's motivated and kind of the glue keeping everything together, where Clint's kind of given up a little bit more.
Yeah, I remember like that, yeah, the scene where they're looking through that whole archive and he's kind of giving up. I remember kind of thinking one of my only downfalls and like negative points to this episode would be, I wonder if they forecast that a bit too obviously about him saying, he's all upset, and the two of them just being together, like looking back, I'm not sure if we necessarily would have predicted it during the episode. But if you'd really done your research on this and maybe looked up what the topics of the episode were, like, we tried to go in blind, but I feel like there's some potential where one of us would have easily thrown out the concept of like, I wonder if Clint is gonna, if they're both gonna make it this time, or if they're gonna switch that around. So maybe not quite as shocking as it could have been, but I mean, it was still a very powerful scene. You feel the emotion. In terms of the other half of it, I would say the most shocking scene in this, or one of the most surprising scenes, I guess, was that moment we see in this one where the Watcher, that he knows, or that he's been found by Ultron, and Ultron comes through for the first time and like actually addresses the Watcher and breaks in there and everything. Like, that's actually intense. Like, I remember feeling worried. I'm like, oh God, like, what's gonna happen now? Is the Watcher gonna be okay? What's gonna happen? So the stakes really got raised here in a way that they hadn't been before. It was a strong episode. I think I'm right there with you. You said it's probably my second favorite in second place with the Strange episode. So it's a good one.
Yeah, I totally agree. And yeah, just another gorgeous one. I think also too, the one last point I've got for this is it was kind of nice seeing a little bit more of Ultron, because he's sort of an integral character. He's got his own like movie where he's a big bad, but he doesn't really, I think like that movie is the Age of Ultron's the one I think that gets like penalized the most when people talk about the MCU humor. And I think like it didn't really have a super serious atmosphere, despite him being like a really capable and potentially dangerous villain. And so it was really neat to see him be able to kind of execute his goals, and just how like the machine side of him that's so like laser focused, and his sense of duty, like there's no talking him out of it like you could talk Thanos out of it. It's just he's got a prerogative. He thinks that life needs to be eliminated so that the world can flourish, and he's gonna do it. There's no stopping him. There's no reasoning with him. He is like, he's executing his task, and that's it. And then he has that moment where he thinks he's destroyed everything because he's not aware of the other like universes or realities. And so he's just like, I'm finished, and that's it. He's finished. And then he just catches the Watcher at the last second, and it like spills over. But I think like he's such a neat villain in terms of like, yeah, I'm not the most like morally complex because he's very black and white, but I like that. In kind of every now and again it's nice to have one of those that's like, you get those heroes that are like, oh, but we can change his mind, like, oh no, if we just talk to him. And it's like, no, this guy is a problem.
Well, that he needs to be taken down, right? And I think they do a good job also of, in a very short time, showing you that he is not something to be messed with. Like, I think he like cut Thanos in half with like just a laser beam from one of the stones, like,
as if it's nothing.
As if it's nothing. And we know as Marvel fans, like, Thanos is no joke, especially when he's got all this power and all that. So it's pretty crazy. And the fact that he also just takes the Mind Stone from Vision's body and is like an amalgamation of Vision and Ultron together. The design of him, for sure, Ultron, is just, it's so cool. And that one scene, I can't remember if it's this or the next episode, but I'm just going to shout it out now. When that big portal opens up in the sky and it's like humongous, but then I think it's this next episode, isn't it? And his body comes down. It's just so cool.
Yeah, I'm not sure. They've kind of blended
Maybe
together
I'm ahead of
these
myself.
ones. But it's okay.
Yeah, it really was a two-part feature.
It really was. And so, yeah, obviously the climax of the show is episode 9, which I think my favorite thing about this episode is actually the title of it. I think it's so clever. And the title of this is What If the Watcher Broke His Oath? Because it's really like what we've been leading up to this whole time. And so this is the Smash Bros episode. Everybody's here. And
Nickelodeon All-Star Battle Royale episode.
That's right. That's right. We got SpongeBob. Everybody's here, and we got to take down Ultron. And so obviously the Watcher pulls out his ragtag team of all these mismatched heroes, Avengers Light, if you will, and they've got to take him down. Light.
Premium.
So. What do you think? I thought this episode, I enjoyed it. I don't think it was the star for me. I think there were some really cool parts in it, and overall I really enjoyed it. But I feel like it sort of underutilized some of the team, and it was kind of a weird amalgamation of characters they drew from. I think a lot of them were awesome. Like Dark Strange was back, and he was super cool. I liked Peggy, Carter, and Natasha together a lot. I think they made a great duo. They had great chemistry, and them like double cap shield throws were amazing. And a lot of the team up abilities were cool, like Strange duplicating Mjolnir and having a bunch of Mjolnirs flying around and hitting Ultron. Like I think they used them really well in terms of like the fighting, but I didn't really get a great sense of camaraderie between them all, which maybe that was intentional because they're pulled from very different places. It's not like they're just strangers. They're literally from different universes. And so that might have been intentional. I think also we kind of are missing out a bit because we didn't get the Gamora episode, obviously.
Yeah, that was a big loss not to have that.
And I think that's really a shame. I'm hoping in the future that we get to see that lost episode in some capacity, because she's another character that I think is really interesting, and she's with Stark, and it just raises a lot of questions, and so that was a bit of a shame. And overall I liked it. I don't think the stakes were quite as high or as grand as episode 8. So I think especially if you kind of binge watch this instead of doing the week-to-week formula that we had, I think this could be kind of a little bit like underwhelming compared to how exciting of an episode the previous one was. And that's not to say that this one wasn't exciting, but I think the other one just was above and beyond, and then this one was a little bit just average scale, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I don't know. To me, this one is one of the ones, like I had those 2 episodes that kind of raised up my rankings. I think this one's really kind of moved down. I mean, I would say that this one again had some of the best visuals. Like the fights were cool. I thought that Strange had some visually pleasing magic that he did, like that armor that kind of went over all the heroes was pretty interesting to look at.
That was so cool, and it all kind of like matched them a little bit. Like Thor got like a winged helmet, and like Carter had more of like a knight's thing. And just a shout out to Strange got another really amazing like demon scene where he was just like kaleidoscoped all these different like demon pictures over him. So yeah. It was a spectacle for sure.
It was a spectacle, yeah. And I think as far as like the action and the animation, if you just want to watch some good old fashioned like pleasing TV to look at, I really liked it. I think this episode for me is just kind of had some. I'm not usually one to get caught up on like, oh, I'm gonna be pretentious and pick up this one like little plot point, but I think there's just a few too many things for me that just kind of bring it down. And then you touched on it earlier about how did this ruin the Doctor Strange episode in a way by redeeming him, instead of leaving him trapped in that little dimension. And I mean, it's even more than that too, because it seems like he's pretty much just normal Doctor Strange in this one. Like you don't really get the sense that he's evil in any way or that he's not helping. So it just kind of undermined almost for me. Like, is he really not evil now? Is he just even more strong version of regular Doctor Strange that can now like summon demons and open portals from different dimensions? Like it's just kind of weird. So I don't know if I love that. I also don't know if I loved necessarily like, I mean, it's not their fault that the Gamora thing happened. Like they had timelines to keep up with their episode releases and whatnot. So that's not a huge deal. Would have loved to see that episode first, but if not, that's fine. I think that the other thing that kind of bothered me was, again, like just some of the power balancing was just kind of weird. Like the Watcher obviously is quite powerful because he's able to hold his own, not get immediately obliterated by Ultron. But then, I mean, as cool as the spectacle of it was, like, are two characters just throwing vibranium shields really gonna kill someone like that? Like, how did they? I don't know. I know that's a bit reductive, and they obviously had more going on, but it just seemed a bit too, like, the stakes weren't really as high as we thought overall. And then the other thing that happens too at the end when this all ended up being a big scheme of Killmonger, and he goes for the stones at the end. He's trying to help the team, but at the end of the day, look out for his own interest and take the stones. And then it just ends up like that's a pretty cool plot point, honestly. But then they just get trapped right back in that pocket dimension, and it's like the same kind of outcome as the Strange thing was at first, except now Strange is watching them. Like, it's what has redeemed Mr. Strange like this? It's just a bit too strange. Too strange. Good one. But yeah, I don't know. It just had a few little things that were off like that just weren't great. I guess maybe I'll leave it at that.
I agree. I think it got wrapped up a little bit too easily in a nice, pretty bow. Like, yeah, Killmonger, like, that's an interesting twist, but it seems like it was kind of a twist for the sake of being a twist. Like, oh no, we got you, and then it's over in 30 seconds, like, taken care of.
Yeah, and like the whole series was this huge build-up, and then not a huge build-up, but they introduced all these characters, they showed a story, they brought them all together at the end, and I feel like if you're going to go to the trouble of bringing them together, I just wish there was a bit more of a payoff as to, like, why they were together. And they didn't have a whole lot of scenes interacting, like you said. The action was great, but I mean, it just wasn't the same scale as something like watching the Avengers for the first time, and obviously that's a really unfair comparison, but at the same time, I feel like it just could have been a bit more.
Well, and that's kind of what they were emulating too. Like, I'm pretty sure they have one of those, they have like the spin around circle scene where they like do the same kind of like the first Avengers did in New York, and it spins them around and you see them all like getting those poses, and it's so iconic, and they recreated that here with these characters, and it's obviously like a cute homage, but it kind of, it does imply that kind of comparison. And obviously it's different circumstances, and I don't think they should have like immediate like relationship. Obviously it makes sense they're new here and they don't know each other, but at the same time, like, you're right, like, it kind of in a way sort of makes you question like why they weren't standalone episodes. Like, I think it's really cool that they built up to something, but the problem is that when you do that, it needs to be greater than the sum, or greater than each individual part, right? Like, to bring it all together,
exactly.
You have higher expectations as an audience member, because this is the big culmination of everything. It should bring something to the table from each character and each story, and it just kind of either doesn't elevate itself, or it sort of brings it down in retrospect, like you mentioned with Strange. Like, his story was very powerful because there were very clear consequences for him, and now it's like, well, I guess he's got to just watch over these two forever and make sure they don't escape from his little kaleidoscope bubble. But at the same time, like, is that worse than him just being isolated? Like, he's sort of just like I
mean, it's not a lot better for sure.
Yeah, like,
it's not a lot better, but it still is a redemption though, because he's performing something that's like a good guy act, is to be the keeper of this.
Yeah, exactly. He's been redeemed, and also it kind of like answers that question of as well, like, how much influence do these demons have on him? Like, how are they does he have their power in his body, or are they kind of like taking him over from the inside, and like, are they corrupting him as well? Is kind of like what I took from him having this demonic influence. But now he's just a good guy, and he has cool tentacle arms whenever he wants them. And like,
see, what I think they're going for is that time has passed and he's been able to control it. But I think that my canon's just going to be that time has passed and the demons actually made him a better person.
The demons were all secretly just like really nice guys, and like we just assumed based off of unfair like stereotypes.
We stereotype the demons. They made Evil Strange good again.
Okay, I like this. This is the new cameo. If he didn't have those demons, he would have been the one that betrayed them in the end. But thankfully, the tentacles were able to tell him, no, be a nice guy. Put your bug cape on. Devil horns, you're great. You can roast marshmallows on them. Everything's okay.
Flawless. One other thing too that is an interesting parallel to the Strange resolution too is also what happens with Natasha at the end. The fact that she gets sent to a different dimension. Like the Watcher makes an exception for her and lets her go back to a different timeline and be
Mm-hmm.
where Black Widow had died. And I think that's kind of also the same thing of like, wait, she just this is the Natasha that lost Clint, right? And
Yeah.
then now she's getting to go to this new
Well, she lost
this
like
new timeline, which
everybody
is
because Ultron like killed everyone, and it was just kind of
right,
her and
right,
Clint
right.
left. Yeah.
Right. So it's interesting that the Watcher, like, he had to, have such a struggle over breaking his oath of assembling this team, but then he also, I guess he's just like, screw it, I've already done this, so maybe I'll just help this girl out. I guess that's the logic on it, but it seems like he broke his oath twice, which
Yeah.
is, I wonder what the ramification will be. Maybe that's something we could talk about for our season 2 hopes, I guess. But it's interesting to see like what exactly was his oath, like what is the
Mm-hmm.
consequence?
Yes, especially if that is the title of the episode as well. It's called "What If the Watcher Broke His Oath," and so you'd think that would be a very that would be a question that should be addressed. And so I have some thoughts from that. Maybe we, like you said, we'll save that for our hopes for season 2. But before we get into that, we'll just quickly kind of wrap up. I think we probably have a pretty good idea based off of what we said. But if you have a favorite episode and a least favorite episode,
Yeah, well,
if
I
you
mean,
had
I'll
to
run through it.
say.
I'll run through it. There's no surprise. The Doctor Strange episode 4, I think I'll speak for myself, probably for you too.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite episode for sure. Just the visuals, especially seeing great visuals for the first time. It's a sinister tone you barely see in the MCU. And I thought Benedict Cumberbatch did a great job. I think he was honestly one of the best actors in the show overall. And I would say also that I just want to shout out as other favorites would be the What If Earth Lost Its Mightiest Heroes, which is the third episode, the murder mystery. I think it's really strong. And then of course the eighth episode as well, with the first time the Watcher gets figured out. Like that was just maybe my favorite
Mm-hmm.
moment, along with a couple others in the whole series. So those are the ones for me. Do you want me to do my least favorite now too? I guess I'll just get it out of the way.
Yeah.
It's the Thor episode. That's the one.
No shock.
Didn't really feel it, and I think if I was to pick one aside from that, because it's just such a landslide victory for last place, I guess, for Thor, I would say probably my second least favorite might actually be number 9. As weird as that is to say, just for the reasons we said. I just feel like I would look more fondly back on this series if it was just a standalone anthology rather than how they summarized it with the last episode, even if it had some cool ideas.
Mm-hmm. That's fair. That's fair. And it also too, like, an ending's important. It's, if you're gonna nail anything, it's the start and the end. That's what sticks with people the most.
Yeah.
As unfair as that
Exactly.
may be.
So.
Mine's
No,
actually.
but it's true because it's like your last thing, right?
Yeah,
So
it's your
it is
final
what it is.
impression. It sits with you. I'm very similar. I have only 2 slight deviations. So if I did my top 3, it's very clearly Strange, episode 4 and episode 8 with Ultron. But I swap out the Mightiest Heroes for episode 2, T'Challa as Star-Lord. I think that was just a lot of fun. And then my bottom 2 would be obviously Thor, and I put episode 6 with Killmonger just because I think that one was just like such a waste of potential, and it's more disappointing than bad, I think.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
But yeah, overall, I think we're really close. But very positive and looking forward to season 2. So I think maybe we'll end off with talking about what we're hoping for season 2. And I want to just launch in with what you mentioned about the Watcher breaking his oath. And I really hope in season 2 we get to see some consequences from that. I really hope that it doesn't just go back to just getting some like kind of standalone stories. I want to see some of those as well, and some follow-ups to number 1. I know the only one that's confirmed is that we're getting more Peggy. So presumably we're getting where she picks up from her first episode, where she's kind of been pushed into the future instead of Cap. And so she meets, I think, Nick Fury, and it might be Carol, I think might be the other one.
Yeah, Carol, I think, was there.
Yeah, so I think we're going to see some of that. So I'd like to see some direct sequels as well, just kind of in their own universes. But I really do want to see if there is a consequence for the Watcher, because like you said, his oath seems like it has a lot of gravity, and it's this very important thing. He's bound to it in some capacity, and he just willy-nilly got to break it for no apparent fallout. So I think that's a really interesting concept that could be explored and maybe could be the overall like narrative thread that ties season 2 together.
I think they're going to have to address it, honestly. I don't know how you would frame season 2 without the watcher narrating it. And I don't see a universe, a multiverse, as they might say, where they could just kind of have him talk about more stories like he did at the start of this season and not address what happened to him now that he's become more or less a character in the show, right? He's not just like the host. So I think we'll definitely get a resolution to that. I hope it's interesting. I'm interested to see like who is the watcher oathed to, or I guess like, or what is the word? Oath, betrothed? I don't know.
No, betrothed is when you get married.
He's married, yeah.
Who does the watcher marry? Spoiler,
kinda,
season 2. Him and Natasha get married. He seems to be fond of
what
her.
If the watcher married Natasha? No, but
That's a hot
I mean,
take.
honestly, like I'm interested to see what that is. So that's the thing. That's a hot take for sure, no doubt about it. And the other thing with me is I guess I just want to see more. I guess one thing I'd want to see maybe is a longer format episode structure, whether that's shorter, fewer episodes, but longer with more time to tell a more cohesive story. I feel like we would have liked almost any one of these episodes if it had been given even more time to breathe and expand. So I would rather have like 5 episodes that are all an hour long rather than 9 jam-packed half hours. But maybe that's just me. The other thing I just want to see is more. I wanted them to change the genre and like do some crazy things, you know, like as much as I liked most of this art style and I know I think we said before they probably want to keep it in line with a lot of the MCU type of look. I would love to see stuff like what about a noir episode? You know, what about a anime episode? Like think of some of the stuff they did with Spider-Verse and how interesting it was to see those art styles with Spider-Man, even though that's, you know, was part of Miles Morales' movie. Like it would be so cool to see, you know, what if Avengers but anime or something just for an episode. Like that would be very interesting. And I feel like that probably isn't the way they're gonna go, but if I had to pick, it would for sure be some different styles of like animation even, or if not just genre like the zombie one we saw, maybe mechs or something, you know, but new stuff would be so cool.
That would be so cool. Like I can imagine like the zombie episode, but actually do it in like a horror setting. Like that would have been so shocking to have gotten, or like like the Killmonger one, those Gundams, it could have been like a Gundam anime like mech kind of thing. Like that's so cool.
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. And I know a lot of it's based off of comics and whatnot too. So maybe their hands are tied in terms of they can't get so ridiculously creative because it's off of source material. But I just want them to pick the craziest source material they can and give that a shot.
I just thought of one just off the top of my head, and this is what I really want to hope for. And I've heard about it as like there's like a Punisher comic where the Punisher just like kills all the Avengers or like a bunch of other superheroes because like he's the Punisher and he just like goes and guns them down. And I want to see them do that. But I want it to be like, well, I guess it wouldn't really work with John Bernthal. Is that the actor who played the Punisher?
Yeah.
I guess that the storyline of him killing everyone probably wouldn't work because that's just not, I think, a route that his character would go. So I either want to see the Punisher just go like absolutely wild, or I want to see John Bernthal's Punisher come into it because that show is amazing and I would love to see him brought back. Him and Karen should show up for an episode.
I'm so with you. I wish I was wearing my Punisher shirt right now. I'll wear it the next time we record an extra episode, just in honor of this idea, because I would love that. That would be a top tier episode, no doubt.
Perfect. Well, we'll be stewing on this for a while because I think we got a lot of time. But in the meantime, you guys can let us know what you want to see from season 2, or just what you thought about season 1. Tell us about how beautiful the show was. Tell us about how you thought the Party Thor was the funniest thing that you've ever seen in your life, or if you've ever found an MCU character that was more ripped than the Collector and maybe we overlooked something. So you can write in and get in touch with us at circlesandsquarespod@gmail.com, or tweet to us on Twitter at C&S-pod. Whatever's more comfortable for you. And we just want to say thanks so much for sticking with us and watching this new kind of weird experimental what if episode. We really appreciate anyone who engages with us, listens to our episodes. If you want to give us a like, subscribe on any of the platforms, that really helps us out. But most of all, we love that you're listening, and enjoy more games and movies in the future. And I think that does us for the day.